Christmas is supposed to feel warm. Even if the food is overcooked and your aunt won't stop talking about politics, there's still something about it. Maybe the lights or the smell of cinnamon and pine. That makes it feel like everyone puts their weapons down for a day. At least, that's what I used to think. Until this Christmas. Until my brother stood up at the table, cleared his throat, and with the confidence of a man who truly believed the world belonged to him, said, "We all voted and agreed. You're no longer part of this family's future plans." And the worst part? Everyone nodded. But before I get ahead of myself, let me back up. My name's Leo. I'm 29, live in a quiet part of Oregon, and work remotely as a product designer. Nothing flashy. I've always been the quiet one in the family, the kid who didn't cause drama, who went with the flow, who'd bring a book to family events and somehow became everyone's emotional trash can. You know the type, too polite to interrupt, too passive to say no, the one everyone assumes will be fine no matter what. My older brother, Julian, is the opposite. Loud, charming, the kind of guy who could get a job offer at a funeral. He's 33, works in real estate, sort of. He flips properties, usually using our parents' money, or charm, or guilt, or whatever works in the moment. He's always had this unspoken role as the golden child, the family protector, the future patriarch. It was never said out loud, but we all felt it. I used to think that kind of favoritism was just in my head. That is, until Grandma passed away. But even that didn't start the fire. Looking back, it's like the whole family dynamic had been rotting slowly under the surface for years. Little things. Passive-aggressive jabs from my mom about how not everyone needs a fancy college degree to be successful. Dad, pretending to be proud of me when I got promoted, but asking if Julian had coached me through the interview. My younger sister, Claire, who used to be close to me, once told me that I needed to be less sensitive when I brought up how Julian always seemed to bulldoze conversations and decisions. And yet, I still showed up. Every holiday, every birthday, every Sunday dinner when I could. I brought gifts, offered to help clean up, even covered for Julian more times than I can count when he flaked out on commitments. Like the time we were supposed to help Dad repaint the garage, Julian bailed last minute, of course, but somehow I ended up being the one they sighed at. If you were more persuasive, maybe your brother wouldn't blow things off, Mom had said. That one stuck. Anyway, the real shift started in October. Grandma hadn't been gone more than 6 weeks when the rumors began. We were sitting in the living room after Claire's baby shower. Julian's wife, Amanda, had made some comment about expanding their house for the new baby, and someone joked, "You'll be able to once Grandma's house sells." That should have been a harmless comment. But Julian had smiled like he knew something the rest of us didn't. Like the inheritance was already in his pocket. I remember asking casually, "Did Grandma leave a will?" And the whole room went quiet. Claire avoided my eyes. Mom looked like I'd asked if she was dating again. It was weird. The weeks that followed were even weirder. Julian kept making comments like, "Once the house is officially mine, I'm thinking of knocking down that sunroom. Totally wasted space." Amanda mentioned looking into school districts, once we're settled in Grandma's neighborhood. It was like everyone had accepted it. Like it was some unspoken truth that the estate, worth a couple million, conservatively, was Julian's by default. I tried bringing it up with Mom. Just to ask. Nothing confrontational. We were sitting in her kitchen after brunch one Sunday. I asked, "Do you know if Grandma had a will? I just feel like it would be good for us all to be on the same page." She didn't even look up from her coffee. "Don't start with that, Leo. You know your brother's in real estate. It makes sense for him to take over the property. He'll take care of it." But was that what Grandma wanted? She set her cup down a little too hard. You think she would have wanted to see her home turned into a rental? You'd probably use it as an Airbnb. She said it with a smirk, like it was a joke. But I wasn't laughing. That was the moment something cracked in me. Not broke, just cracked. A hairline fracture in the foundation of years of being the agreeable one. Because I knew something they didn't. What none of them realized was that Grandma and I had actually been close. Like, really close. After Grandpa died, I was the only one who visited her regularly. I'd go over on Sundays and help her with groceries, or just sit and listen. We'd play gin rummy. I fixed her computer more times than I can count. And most importantly, I was there when she started talking about her will. One afternoon, this was back in June, she brought it up. Out of nowhere. We were watching Jeopardy, and she said, "You know, Leo, I'm changing the will this week." I looked up, surprised. Oh, she nodded, folding her hands. Your brother assumes he's getting the house. Your mother too. I'm tired of assumptions. You've been the only one who's shown up, year after year, and I want you to have something that shows I noticed. I didn't know what to say. I was stunned. I tried to deflect, even told her I didn't need anything. But she just smiled. Doesn't matter if you need it. I'm giving it to you because you earned it. Those words would haunt me for months. Not in a bad way, but in the way you feel the pressure of carrying something heavy and valuable, something people might come after if they knew you had it. I didn't tell anyone. Not a soul. Partly out of fear, partly out of respect. I figured, when the time came, it would all be handled properly. Legally. Quietly. I underestimated my family. The weeks after Grandma's funeral were like walking on a frozen lake. The tension was there, silent and just beneath the surface. Julian started acting like the house was already his. My parents nodded along. Claire avoided me like I was radioactive. And then came Christmas. Dinner was at my parents' place. Everyone was dressed up, fake smiles on, too much wine in their glasses. I brought a casserole like always. Got Claire's kid a Lego set. Sat next to my dad and tried to pretend everything was normal. But something was off. You could feel it. Julian kept giving me this look, smug, like he knew a joke I didn't. Amanda was practically bouncing in her chair. Even Mom seemed oddly giddy. I didn't realize what was happening until dessert. Until Julian stood up, tapped his spoon against a wine glass, and said he had an announcement. I'll never forget the smugness in his voice, or how slowly he looked around the table, drawing out the silence. I just want to say, after a lot of conversations, we've come to a family decision. We all voted and agreed. You're no longer part of this family's future plans. He actually smiled as he said it. And then the rest of them, my parents, Claire, even Amanda, nodded. Like it was a boardroom decision. Like I'd just been voted off the island. I froze. My fork was halfway to my mouth. I thought, for a split second, it had to be a joke. But the looks on their faces told me otherwise. That's when I realized. They didn't just think they were cutting me out emotionally. They thought they were cutting me out of Grandma's legacy. Out of the estate. Out of the family tree, surgically and with precision. But what they didn't know was sitting in my coat pocket. And when I slowly put my fork down, wiped my mouth, and reached for my jacket. Let's just say, the night didn't end how they expected. My hand hovered over my jacket for a second too long. I remember that moment vividly, not because of what I did, but because of what I didn't do. I didn't react the way they wanted me to. I didn't ask why. I didn't get angry or raise my voice. I didn't even laugh, not yet. I just calmly picked up my coat from the back of my chair, sat back down, and slowly reached into the inside pocket. I could feel Julian's eyes on me. He thought I was about to storm out. Amanda was already smirking. My mom looked relieved, as if this uncomfortable thing was almost done. That they could go back to sipping wine and congratulating each other on finally cutting off the dead weight. But instead of standing up, I laid a thin, worn leather folder right on the table in front of me. Everyone stopped talking. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even loud. The only sound was the faint clink of silverware and the hum of Christmas music playing from the Bluetooth speaker in the corner. I didn't open the folder yet. I just let it sit there. Then I leaned back in my chair and looked around the table, one by one, like I was taking roll call. Future plans, huh? I finally said, voice low. That's funny. You all seem so confident. Julian narrowed his eyes, clearly trying to read my tone. Leo, come on, don't make this weird. This is just, look, we've all talked about it. You've never really been part of the bigger vision for the family, you know? The bigger vision for the family. I repeated, my voice still calm. Are we a tech startup now? Claire let out a breath, like she was annoyed I wasn't getting emotional. Leo, this doesn't have to be dramatic. It's just that. We've all noticed how you've been kind of distant. You always do your own thing. You barely talk at family events. You didn't even offer to help with Grandma's affairs. That last part hit me in the chest, but not in the way they thought it would. I'd intentionally stayed quiet after Grandma's passing because I didn't want to be accused of meddling. And now they were using that silence as proof I didn't care? Is that what you think? I asked, looking directly at Claire. That I didn't care? She flinched, but Julian stepped in. Look, it's not personal. But this is a family that works together, plans together, and builds together. You've always been kind of separate. And Grandma wanted her legacy to go to someone who could expand it. Someone like you? I asked, voice still even. He smiled. Exactly. There it was. The assumption, the arrogance, the unshakable belief that he was entitled to it all, not just the house, but the narrative, the family story, the throne. What if I told you Grandma didn't see it that way? I asked, slowly flipping the folder open. They all leaned in slightly, curiosity overcoming their smugness. Inside were two neatly printed documents. The first was the updated will, dated just 3 months before her death, naming me as the sole heir to her estate. The second was the property deed transfer confirmation, notarized, signed, and already filed with the county recorder. I didn't push it toward them yet. I just let them see it. Julian's face dropped first. Not all the way. He tried to recover quickly, but there was a flicker of panic in his eyes he couldn't hide. Amanda leaned forward like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. My mom's mouth parted slightly, her hand tightening around her wine glass. Dad, who'd been mostly silent up until now, finally spoke. What is this? I met with Grandma's lawyer 2 weeks before she passed, I said quietly. She wanted me to have the house, the land, everything. She signed it over. She told me she'd already made her decision. Julian barked a laugh, but it was hollow. You're lying. This is fake. Grandma would never. She did, I interrupted. You just weren't there to hear it. Claire looked like she was about to cry. Not because she was sad, but because she realized she was suddenly on the losing team. You didn't even say anything. Why wouldn't you tell us? Would you have listened? I asked, staring right at her. Would any of you have believed me? Or would you have tried to twist it? Undermine it? Claim she wasn't in her right mind? You think I don't know how this family operates? My mom slammed her glass down on the table. Leo, how dare you suggest we wouldn't have handled this properly? I laughed. This time, I couldn't help it. Handled it properly? Like how you all just held a vote about removing me from the family. Like that. Silence. Julian was red in the face now. You manipulated her. You took advantage of an old woman who didn't know what she was doing. I snapped. You weren't there, Julian. You didn't visit. You didn't call. You didn't even show up to her hospital appointments unless someone begged you to. I was the one who sat with her for hours. I was the one who held her hand when the medication made her forget where she was. You were off flipping condos and bragging about your portfolio. Don't you dare accuse me of manipulating her. Amanda muttered something under her breath. I turned to her. What was that? She looked up, startled. Nothing. No, go ahead. Say it. She looked away. Dad cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Leo, look. This has clearly been a misunderstanding. Maybe if you'd brought this to us earlier. What? You would have welcomed the news. I scoffed. No, you would have done exactly what you just tried to do. Cut me out. Only this time, you'd make sure it was legal. My mom stood up, her voice sharp. You think you're better than us because you sat with an old woman for a few afternoons and got her to sign a few papers? No, I said. I think I'm better than you because I didn't treat her like an ATM. That landed like a punch. She sat back down. For a long time, no one said anything. The music kept playing in the background. Have yourself a merry little Christmas, warbled softly from the speaker. I thought about how surreal it was. A beautiful table set with roast beef and green bean casserole, flickering candles, a snow-dusted wreath in the center, and around it, a group of people who had just tried to cut me out of their lives while wearing Santa sweaters and sipping eggnog. It was almost funny. But the real breaking point didn't happen then. It happened 2 days later. I'd gone back to my apartment, exhausted but strangely calm. I figured the dust would settle, and we'd all go our separate ways. I was done trying to fix things. For once, I was going to let them stew in their own mess. Until my phone started ringing off the hook. It started with a call from Claire. I didn't answer. Then a voicemail from Amanda, saying they needed to talk. Then text from Julian. You think this is over? We'll see how long that deed holds up. You seriously think you earned this? But I ignored them all. Until my landlord called me, saying someone had come by asking for my apartment number, claiming to be my family, and saying they were handling Leo's affairs. I froze. Then came the knock at my door. I looked through the peephole. It was my mother. She was holding a thick envelope in one hand, her face unreadable. And I knew, right then, that they weren't going to let this go quietly. They weren't going to accept what Grandma had done, and I wasn't even close to being done with the fight. She didn't knock twice. Just stood there, like she knew I'd open the door. Like she was entitled to be let in, no matter how things had ended a few nights ago. And stupidly, maybe out of habit, Maybe out of some lingering guilt that I couldn't shake, I opened it. "Leo," my mom said, voice calm, too calm. "We need to talk." I didn't step aside. "About what?" She held up the envelope. "You left before we could explain everything." Emotions were high. Your brother was out of line, I admit that. But we all were. I came to clear the air. I don't want this tension to ruin the family. I just stared at her. For a second, I wondered if this was real, if she was genuinely here to make amends. If maybe, just maybe, there was a shred of maternal warmth left. Then I saw the corner of the envelope, the logo of a law firm. She caught me noticing. "This is just information. Options. There's no need to panic. You've made your point, but that house, it has history. It's part of the family. It shouldn't belong to one person." There it was. "Let me guess," I said. "You want me to sign it over? Split it? Sell it and divide the money?" She smiled like I was finally being reasonable. "You'd still get a generous share. More than fair." I didn't even respond. Just slowly closed the door. Her foot darted forward, stopping it from shutting all the way. "Leo," she said sharply, her voice changing. "You don't have to make this difficult." I looked down at her foot and back up at her. "Move it." She held my stare for another second, then backed off. I shut the door and locked it, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with anger. Not fiery, loud anger. Cold, quiet, bitter anger. The kind that simmers for years and finally bubbles to the surface when it's too late for anyone to control it. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and just let it all hit me. The years of passive digs. The favoritism. The way they always acted like I was the backup plan, the filler sibling. Even Grandma's death didn't slow them down. They circled like vultures the moment they thought her assets were up for grabs. I didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, things only got worse. The emails started pouring in. At first, they were civil. Claire asking to talk. Amanda saying she hoped we could come to a peaceful solution. But then Julian got involved. His first email was 3 paragraphs long and used the word deserved 6 times. As in, you know I deserve that house. Grandma just wasn't thinking clearly when she signed the deed. "This is about what the family deserves, Leo, not what you earned." He attached his own version of a revised family plan and proposed that I sell the estate back to the family at 70% of its value. The generosity, he claimed, would heal the wounds. I deleted it without replying. 2 days later, I got served. They'd filed a petition to challenge the will and deed, citing undue influence, lack of capacity, and possible forgery. I should have expected it, but it still hit me like a brick to the chest. Suddenly, I was a villain, a manipulator, the quiet, forgotten middle child who dared to rise above his station. And now they wanted to drag me through the mud until I broke. For a few weeks, I almost did. The legal fees started piling up fast. My inbox turned into a war zone. Every day, new accusations, new motions, new threats. Julian even had the audacity to email some of my coworkers on LinkedIn. Yes, seriously, suggesting they reconsider working with someone under legal investigation. It didn't go anywhere, thankfully. But the embarrassment, the anxiety, that stuck around. I lost weight, stopped sleeping. My productivity tanked. My boss noticed, and I had to awkwardly explain that I was dealing with a family matter. I didn't tell him it was a full-blown inheritance war that felt more like a custody battle. And worst of all, I started second-guessing myself. Was I wrong for accepting the estate? Should I have said no? Maybe Grandma wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe I was just being selfish, holding on to something out of spite. I spent a lot of nights pacing my apartment, opening the folder with the deed, and will over and over again, rereading every signature, looking for mistakes, proof that I hadn't hallucinated at all. But every time, the same thought came back to me. She wanted me to have this. I remembered her voice, soft but clear. "You've been the only one who shows up, Leo. That matters." So I made a choice. If they were going to turn this into a battle, I'd fight. But I wouldn't fight them. I'd fight for myself. Quietly. Strategically. I hired a real attorney. Not the budget guy I started with, but a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Elise who specialized in probate disputes. She wasn't cheap, but she was exactly what I needed. "Elise," I said in our first Zoom call, "I don't want to destroy them. I just want them to leave me alone." She raised an eyebrow. "That's usually not how these things go. But okay, let's play defense. And play it well." Over the next few months, she dismantled their case piece by piece. Their lack of capacity claim? Grandma had passed a cognitive assessment less than a month before signing the deed. Elise tracked down the neurologist who administered it and got a statement. The undue influence argument? She pulled visitor logs from the senior center showing that I was the only one who consistently visited. Not Julian. Not Claire. Not anyone else. Every time they filed something, we responded with receipts. Meanwhile, I started rebuilding. At first, it was small things. I made a schedule, forced myself to sleep more than 5 hours a night, picked up my guitar again for the first time in years. I used to play in college, and somehow, strumming chords again reminded me that I was more than just the scapegoat of this family drama. I also started seeing a therapist. That might not sound like much, but for me, it was a big step. I'd always been the guy who swallowed things, smiled through it, tried to be the bigger person. But that silence had turned me into someone who didn't know how to set boundaries. Someone who let people step all over him because he thought being liked was the same thing as being loved. I told my therapist everything. About the years of neglect, the emotional landmines, the way Julian had always been allowed to take up space while I shrank myself to keep the peace. She didn't offer solutions at first, just listened, then slowly helped me reframe things. "You're not selfish," she said once, during a particularly tough session. "You're just finally allowing yourself to own something for the first time." That stuck with me. I started journaling, just for myself, writing down things I remembered from childhood, times I'd been sidelined or used or ignored, not to dwell, but to understand, to track patterns. And as I read through my own words, I started to notice something. This wasn't new. The Christmas ambush hadn't come out of nowhere. It was the climax of years of subtle control, conditioning, and emotional manipulation. And I was finally waking up. By April, Elise told me we were in a strong position. "They're running out of moves," she said. "The judge isn't impressed by their arguments, and their own attorney seems exhausted. I think they expected you to cave." I almost laughed. They always expected that. She smiled. "Well, they're learning." Outside of court, I started laying the groundwork for something else, too. Something that had nothing to do with revenge or proving a point. I started working on a personal project, a design platform for seniors. It was something Grandma had inspired. She'd always struggled with technology, and I thought, what if there was something better? A system built for them, not just adapted? I stayed up late prototyping, sketched interfaces, showed it to a few friends who were developers. Slowly, it became more than an idea. It became something real. I didn't tell my family, of course. By then, communication had gone completely cold. No calls, no texts. Claire sent a half-hearted email on Easter with a passive-aggressive line about how God forgives even the greedy, but I ignored it. My dad never reached out. Not once. Julian's LinkedIn got updated with a new job title, real estate strategist and legacy consultant. Whatever that meant. Amanda kept posting family photos and inspirational quotes, pretending they weren't in the middle of a lawsuit. It was almost funny if it hadn't been so pathetic. But I didn't engage. I didn't retaliate. I just kept building my case, my project, my life. And then, in early May, I got an email from Elise. Subject line, "You're going to want to see this." Inside was a court document, a motion for withdrawal. Julian and the rest of them had dropped the case. No explanation, no apology, but the war was over. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I closed my laptop, stood up from my desk, and walked over to the window. The sun was setting, casting this soft orange glow across the trees. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, soaking it in. Not because I'd won something, but because I'd finally stopped losing. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the next time I saw them, I wouldn't be the same Leo they remembered. There's a strange silence that follows a long, bitter fight. Not peace, just a kind of emptiness, like the air hasn't decided whether to relax or brace for the next blow. That's where I lived for weeks after the case was dropped. No one reached out. Not Julian. Not Claire. Not my parents. Not even a stray text pretending nothing had happened. The silence said more than words ever could. They weren't apologizing. They weren't making peace. They were just regrouping. And so was I. See, the thing about being the quiet one in the family is that everyone assumes you're not paying attention, that you don't remember. But I did. I remembered every slight, every dig, every "you'll understand when you're older" that really meant you don't matter right now. For most of my life, I swallowed those moments. Now, I started writing them down. Not out of spite, at first, just to see them on paper. But as the list grew, something shifted. I started thinking bigger. Revenge wasn't about petty insults or yelling at a dinner table. It wasn't about slashing tires or sending dramatic emails. It was about power, control, reclaiming what they tried to take, my dignity, my name, my seat at the table, and making sure they never had the chance to erase me again. And it wasn't just about me. It was about Grandma. Because the more I looked at it, the more I realized they hadn't just tried to steal from me. They'd tried to bury her choice, her voice. They wanted to rewrite the ending of her life story with Julian as the heir, the hero, the golden boy standing tall with the family estate behind him. But she chose me, and they spat on that. So I decided to build something in her name. I poured myself into the platform I'd started during the legal battle. I called it Eldra, short for Elder and Era, a design platform for seniors, by someone who understood how hard it could be for them to use modern tools. I brought on 2 developer friends, Maya and Ronan, who'd just left a startup and were itching to build something meaningful. We met weekly, worked nights and weekends, bootstrapped everything. We weren't trying to go viral. We were trying to make something real. By late June, we had a beta and a plan. We'd launch at a small tech conference in Portland, under the radar. I used my savings to rent a modest booth, printed brochures with Grandma's picture on them, smiling on her porch, the one Julian thought would be his, and a tagline beneath: technology that respects where you've been. It wasn't just a tribute. It was a challenge. I knew Julian would see it. He had contacts in real estate tech. He followed all the Portland scene blogs. And if he didn't, Amanda definitely would. She tracked my name like a hawk, probably hoping I'd slip up and post something she could twist into a proof that I was unstable or money hungry. I made sure my name was on everything. Not to gloat, to declare, I'm not hiding anymore. And then, while Eldra was quietly gaining traction, I started planting seeds in the one place Julian and the rest couldn't control, the neighborhood. Grandma's neighborhood. The house was mine now. Legally, emotionally, spiritually. And I knew every neighbor by name from the days I used to visit her. I started spending time there again. Mowing the lawn, fixing up the porch, chatting with Mrs. Novak across the street about her garden, helping the Halberts carry groceries inside. They remembered me. They'd watched from their windows when Julian and Amanda rolled in with smug smiles and flashy SUVs, acting like they already owned the place. Now they saw me, and they talked. Turns out, Julian had been planning to demolish the house, tear it down, subdivide the lot, and build 2 sterile, overpriced townhomes. Amanda had already been talking to contractors. Claire's husband had drawn up concept art. They were going to erase the house Grandma had lived in for over 40 years. That was the moment something inside me clicked into place. I wasn't just protecting what was mine anymore. I was going on offense. First step, preservation status. I called a local historian who specialized in legacy homes. He came by, toured the house, took photos, asked questions. I showed him original blueprints, letters Grandma had written to the city about neighborhood zoning, even newspaper clippings from the 80s. He was impressed. This could qualify for historic designation, he said. I didn't hesitate. Let's do it. Within 3 weeks, we'd submitted the application. If approved, the house couldn't be demolished, couldn't be significantly altered. It would become a registered historical home, protected by city ordinance. And here's the kicker. Once it went public, anyone in the neighborhood could oppose future developments on the block that clashed with the legacy aesthetic, including any townhouses Julian was planning to build elsewhere. I didn't tell him. Not yet. The second step, the trust. While digging through Grandma's old files for historic documentation, I found something I hadn't expected: drafts of a community grant program she'd started writing years ago. She never launched it, probably because of health or timing. But the idea was beautiful. A small yearly grant to help elderly homeowners in the neighborhood repair or maintain their homes, so they wouldn't get pushed out by developers. I revived it. I named it the L.M. Holloway Trust, her full initials. I registered it as a nonprofit, used part of the estate to fund the first round, and quietly started spreading the word. Flyers at the grocery store, posters at the senior center, a blurb in the neighborhood paper. 3 neighbors applied within the first month. I approved them all. And with each repair, each new railing, ramp, paint job, I put a small bronze plaque on the property. supported by the L.M. Holloway Trust. Julian had wanted to turn the neighborhood into a gold mine. I was turning it into Grandma's legacy. And then came the final step. By August, Eldra's launch had been modest but promising. We had a few hundred beta users, some early press buzz, and a couple of VC firms sniffing around. That's when I did something I'd been holding off on. I emailed Julian. No subject line. No greeting. Just a single line. Let's talk. I think you'll want to see what I'm building. He responded in 20 minutes. Finally, let me know when and where. I chose a neutral cafe downtown. No need for theatrics. I wore jeans and a button-up. Casual, calm. When he walked in, he looked like he was expecting a fight. I gave him none. He sat down, barely hiding his smugness. So, ready to admit it was too much for you? I smiled. Actually, I'm building something bigger than I expected, and I think you'd want to know about it. I pulled out my tablet and showed him Eldra, the platform, the feedback, the photos of seniors using it in community centers, the grant trust, the preservation campaign, the growing network of neighbors who supported what I was doing. He said nothing for a long time, just stared at the screen. Finally, he leaned back, a flicker of discomfort breaking through his practiced smirk. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to understand something, I said quietly. This isn't about the house, or the money, or even Grandma's will. He frowned. Then what is it about? It's about legacy, Julian. Something you tried to steal. Something you thought belonged to you by default. But you forgot. She chose me. Not just with the deed. With her time. Her trust. Her stories. You thought her house was an investment. I see it as a mission. He scoffed. So this is your big revenge? Community grants and zoning laws. No, I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. That's just the setup. I left him sitting there, confused, uncertain. For the first time in his life, Julian wasn't the one holding the cards. And I wasn't done yet, because there was still one more thing they didn't know, and it was going to change everything. If there's one thing my family taught me, it's that people who feel entitled to everything rarely expect consequences. They expect pushback, sure, an argument, a disagreement, but consequences? No. They assume the world bends for them because it always has. But consequences were coming, and I wasn't going to deliver them in the form of yelling, lawsuits, or shouting matches. I'd done all that already. This final act was going to be precise, controlled. I was going to make sure they felt it. Not just the loss of the estate, not just the end of the lawsuit, but a permanent fracture to their image, their pride, and their plans. It started with a press release. Eldra had been quietly gaining traction. We had passed 3,000 users. Our nonprofit arm, the L.M. Holloway Trust, was now supporting 6 elderly homeowners. The City Preservation Board had fast-tracked the designation for Grandma's house, and the story caught the attention of a local reporter. When she reached out to me for a quote, I knew it was time. The headline ran the following Tuesday. Grandson turns family feud into legacy tech platform to support elderly homeowners. The article opened with the story of how I'd inherited the estate from my late grandmother, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 4 decades. It detailed how I used the inheritance not for personal gain, but to create Eldra and to preserve the homes of vulnerable seniors at risk of being displaced by developers. It quoted neighbors who remembered me visiting Grandma every weekend, compared with a certain flashy relative who only showed up when the inheritance papers were being drawn. I didn't name Julian. I didn't need to. The article went semi-viral locally, then jumped to a national blog focused on tech for good initiatives. And that's when the phone calls began. Hey, I read about you in The Verge. Are you open to interviews? Would Eldra be interested in joining our accelerator? Can we connect you with a few funders in the impact investment space? I said yes to all of it, because what came next would require funding and allies. At the same time, I was receiving messages from people in the neighborhood. Strangers, elders, caregivers, people who told me stories about how hard it was to get ramps installed or navigate confusing apps just to refill a prescription. One woman, 83 years old, wrote, "Your grandma was kind. She gave me half her garden tomatoes every summer. I'm glad you're doing something with that kindness." That message did something to me. It anchored me. But not everyone was thrilled, of course. Julian saw the article. I know he did, because 2 days later I got a cease and desist letter from his new lawyer, claiming defamation, misrepresentation, and emotional harm due to public ridicule. Elise laughed when I showed it to her. Tell your brother that we're very familiar with the definition of defamation. Nothing in that article even named him. She drafted a response that was both professional and brutal. I sent it. Julian went silent again. Until he didn't. 3 weeks later, I was invited to a neighborhood association meeting. The agenda? A rezoning request had been submitted by none other than Julian Holloway. He was trying to purchase a small lot 3 streets over, technically outside the protected zone of Grandma's house, and build a duplex complex. It wasn't illegal, but it would require a special permit. I showed up early to the meeting and brought printed packets. In them, a breakdown of how these kinds of developments historically displaced elderly homeowners, increased rent pressure, and erased the aesthetic of long-standing communities. I included testimonies from residents, photos of Eldra's home repair projects, and a quote from the Preservation Board praising the efforts to maintain historical integrity. Then I stood up and spoke. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just calmly. I'm not here to villainize anyone, I said, without ever using Julian's name. But I do think we need to ask who our neighborhood is for. Is it for the people who live here, who built a life here? Or is it for those who see it as an opportunity to cash out and move on? The vote wasn't even close. The zoning request was denied. Julian's entire plan, his fallback after losing Grandma's estate, was dead in the water. But I wasn't done. The final piece of this puzzle came into place the day I opened Grandma's old hope chest. I'd been putting it off. It was still in the attic of her house, sealed shut with a rusted clasp. I finally forced it open and found dozens of old letters, notebooks, photos. But tucked inside a thick brown envelope was something that changed everything. A signed, handwritten letter to me. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a will. It was just her voice, clear, loving, and intentional. Leo, if you're reading this, then the house is yours. I know your mother and Julian will be upset. They've always assumed they'd inherit things by default. But you showed up for me when no one else did. You never asked for anything. And that's why I'm giving you everything. Make me proud, sweetheart. That letter broke me. I cried for the first time in months. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were cleansing, reaffirming. I had done the right thing. So I framed it. Then I held a public open house. Not for selling, but for honoring. I invited the neighborhood. I printed photos of Grandma through the decades. I included her recipes, her garden layout, stories from her life. And I displayed the letter in a glass case near the entryway. Over 100 people came, even a few reporters. And once again, I didn't name Julian. I didn't have to. The story told itself. After that, the fallout hit him hard. I heard through the grapevine that Julian lost his real estate investors. They didn't like being associated with someone in the news for the wrong reasons. Amanda scaled back her social media presence and locked her profiles. Claire? She tried to reach out once, sent me a long email about how family shouldn't let money come between them. I didn't respond, because she was wrong. It wasn't money that came between us. It was character, and you don't fix that with a phone call. As for me, Eldra landed its first major investment in October. We hired 3 more team members. The nonprofit trust expanded to 2 more neighborhoods. And I moved into Grandma's house full-time, renovating it room by room, keeping the soul intact, but making space for something new. Some nights, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea and watch the sun set over the same street I used to visit as a kid. I think about the dinner where it all began, Julian standing up, smug as ever, declaring I was no longer part of this family's future plans. Funny thing is, he was right. I'm not part of their future. I built my own, and they'll have to live with that for the rest of their lives. They tried to erase me from the story, so I wrote a better one, without them in it.